I think the state has a vested interest in pulling apart families and weakening our social ties because that makes them the people that you go to when you need help rather than having a stable structure, a stable family structure that can support you when things happen. Hey everybody, and welcome back to the re-education camps. This is Undoctrination. I'm Maggie.
And I'm Olivia.
And this week, we're continuing our series on the gender wars that have taken over the internet. This time, we're going to be discussing issues that modern men face. Last week, we put out a massive episode on the history of feminism and how that movement has kind of morphed over time to where it is today. And I think it's only right that we do an episode about how men are struggling in today's world.
Absolutely. And so last week we covered a lot about how gender roles have changed over time and how collectivist versus individualist feminism has both impacted women. But we didn't really touch much on how it has impacted men and how different gender role changes over the last 50 or so years have impacted men throughout childhood, teenage years, adulthood, dating, marriage. There's a lot to go
All
over.
Of it. Yeah, absolutely. And so I think one of the greatest triumphs of feminism is that the world has turned its focus towards issues that women are facing, but that has, at least in my opinion, come at a cost. I don't know if you agree, Olivia. I think men are largely ignored in modern society, and I think that's honestly why we see this huge surge towards the manosphere, and we see all of these, hyper masculine men like Andrew Tate coming out of the woodwork, and men are clamoring for content that is related to them, that discusses issues that they're facing. And so a lot of them will turn to figures like Tate that are discussing these issues. And sometimes they'll accept some of the toxic ideology that goes along with it because they're so desperate to be seen and to be heard.
Absolutely. And I think this happens as a result of people denigrating masculinity so much. They're told everything is the patriarchy's fault. Every success you have is because of the patriarchy, and every failure you have is just like, well, you're a man, so you're just a complete failure if you're not set up in life. And so I think that they do get driven down to whatever you want to call it, an extremist pipeline or, a collectivist manosphere mindset, because I do believe it is a collectivist ideology, but they get driven to this and people get surprised why. Well, I think there's a resource desert. There's not a lot of resources for mental health, for community for men. They're not expected to reach out for mental health or community. And I think they're shamed for it.
Absolutely. And I think these issues start from childhood. I did post on Twitter. I don't know if you saw this, Olivia. I was talking about how I was doing research for this very episode, and I wanted to hear from my audience. I think a lot of my audience on Twitter it does lean more towards men because, I'm a libertarian.
There's not a lot of internet.
Yeah. I'm a libertarian woman and there's not a lot of libertarian women. So I think a large portion of my audience is men. But I posted a question asking my audience, what do you think is the most pressing issue facing men or boys growing up these days? And Olivia, the response to this tweet was overwhelming.
A few. Yeah, I saw a few that really piqued my interest. But I saw you had like over 300 comments, I think, on that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I do think there's this thirst for men to be able to talk about things and feel safe talking about it. And so when they get the opportunity, they do. And I'm so glad that we've been able to create that kind of community. But I did want to read a few of these responses before we really get into it. And I think this one response by diacritical really touches on a lot of things that I think we're going to say. So he says, masculine traits are devalued and discouraged. Young men are pressured to accept feminine traits as more appropriate. Men are discouraged from seeking higher education. Dating apps foster a hookup culture that hurts men and women. I think he touches on a lot of
And we talked about how dating apps and hookup culture negatively impacts women, and we didn't really touch on how it
Right.
negatively impacts men too, but that's so true.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And then one of my favorite Twitter users, David, the young meacock,
Oh, he's nice. I
said,
like him.
he's great. Yeah. He said, being taught that any semblance of success is a benefit of being in a patriarchy and that any strength or masculinity is toxic or threatening. And I think the first part of his statement there is what I really want to highlight first. Being taught that any semblance of success is a benefit of being in a patriarchy.
Mm.
Now, modern culture and just the culture wars in general, I think, have set up this false dichotomy of you are either the victim or the person benefiting from others'
Mhm.
victimization. And it doesn't really have to do with your specific situation. And it has everything to do with immutable characteristics that you were born with. So if you're a man, you're benefiting from the oppression of women, you're benefiting from the patriarchy. And I think, we've had a lot of discussions around, is this a good thing to teach children? Right?
Mm.
And there's been a lot of discussions around, is critical race theory something we should have in our classrooms? But one largely ignored discussion is, how are we treating young boys that are growing up in the classroom?
Not that great. Not
Yeah.
not that great. And just to insert a little personal anecdote, and I was talking a little bit about my younger brother last week, but I think that in public school, he goes to private Catholic school now, but in public school, he had multiple experiences with female counselors and female teachers, and everybody knows that in public school, especially this is back when he was in elementary school and middle school, the vast majority of these teachers are women. They're female. And if you look back and go look at the home, like half of American kids are born into a single parent household, or they don't cohabitate with their father. So they just
Wow.
have a lack of masculine influences. But to go
Mhm.
back to my brother, he would get in trouble for, roughhousing at recess, being too good at sports, keeping the ball away from his friends. And
Right.
these are just masculine traits. I think that boys should be allowed to roughhouse and to play ball
Mhm.
and to get a little rowdy at recess and not be labeled as bullies, not be labeled as like they have an attention deficit disorder. That's another thing that we can talk about. There are so many things that we negatively assign
Mhm.
to masculine traits and traits commonly exhibited in male children. It's really actually sad.
Right, right. And I think this does have a higher occurrence in public schools,
Mm,
because in public schools they want all children to behave and learn the exact same way.
yeah.
And the way they want children to learn is a way that kind of goes against the very nature of many boys. Many boys are very rambunctious. Um, and there isn't necessarily an outlet for them. And you talked about your brother. My brother has a very similar story as well. I mean, I remember being a kid, it was me, my brother, and my little sister. My little sister and I were making amazing grades in schools, right? Like, we were teachers' pets. We made straight A's. We were tested for gifted classes at a very early age. And my brother, on the other hand, was always getting in trouble at schools. And his school system essentially forced my parents to go get him tested for ADHD. And I really want to talk about that particular part of public education. I don't know if you know this, but boys are diagnosed as having ADHD twice as much as girls are. And these are at
Really?
very, very young ages. Um,
Twice?
Twice as
That
much.
is crazy.
Yes. And this is according to the CDC. I'm not getting this off of some
Yeah, they're
random
probably proud of that statistic.
website.
They're like,
Yeah.
"Yeah."
Yeah. About 13% of boys are diagnosed with ADHD compared to 6% of girls. And the amount of these children that are taking medication, these are children, right? About 18% of kids who are diagnosed with ADHD that are ages 2 to 5, 18% are
2
prescribed
to
medication.
5.
Yes.
What type of 2-year-old needs to be on an attention medication?
I know.
That
I
reminds me of
know.
that. You ever see Family Guy? There's an episode where they put Stewie on ADHD medication. That just reminded me of that.
I loved Family Guy growing up. I cannot lie to you. I'm like kind of ashamed of it now, but yeah,
Don't be ashamed.
my brother
But
and
can
I
I
used to watch so much Family Guy.
can I just say how I'm not surprised at all that the problem all stems back to public education, which all stems back
Yeah.
to the government? Like,
Right.
this is the end goal.
Absolutely. And there have been all these sorts of initiatives in public education, K through 12, to really focus on making sure girls are successful later on in life. And that's not a bad thing, right? It's not bad to say, hey, we need to make sure we're setting up girls for success to go into whatever field they want and not just presuming that they want to be a teacher or some kind of more nurturing career. But where do boys get left in that? You know,
There
like
is a
where does
discrepancy,
that
yeah.
leave boys? A lot of times their behaviors are considered disruptive, aggressive, and we've seen efforts to socialize boys into becoming more like girls in early education. And you made a really excellent point earlier that that a lot of these kids, one, don't grow up with men in their households, and then two, the majority of their teachers are women. So at school and at home, yes, a feminine, maternal, nurturing influence is amazing, but they're not necessarily going to be able to give young boys everything they need, right? So a lot of young men are lacking a male role model who understands what it's like and can give these young boys pathways to expressing characteristics that are very innate to who they are. So Jordan Peterson has written a lot about this, especially in 12 Rules for Life. And he quotes this guy, this American psychologist, L.D. Iran, who wrote in the Prescription for Reduction of Aggression that boys should be socialized the way girls have been traditionally socialized. And they should be encouraged to develop socially positive qualities such as tenderness, sensitivity to feelings, nurturance, cooperative, and aesthetic appreciation.
Can I just say, I mean, isn't a common saying that men are visual creatures? I mean, clearly they have aesthetic appreciation. Are men not creative? So many artists are, like, some of the
Yeah.
greatest artists in the world are men. Like, I don't understand
Right.
any of those points, to be honest, but especially that
Yeah.
one. But to go back to being sensitive and tender and nurturing, I mean, strong masculine fathers, in my experience, are all of those things. They're
Yes.
just not in the same way as a mother is, and that's
Right.
okay.
Yeah, and I think there are a lot of characteristics that are more innate to boys, like aggression, for example. There's all this talk about, boys become these really aggressive men, and how can we stop that? And a lot of people prescribe what LD Iran is saying, which is, okay, we need to socialize them more like girls. But really, we need to show young men and young boys that there is a positive way to act out these things that are innate to them. And then there are negative ways to do that. So I think what we're doing is repressing a lot of things that make boys boys and make men men.
Yeah.
And we're not showing them positive ways to express that. We're just telling them that it's bad. And again, back to our original point, when we tell boys growing up that they are bad, which is a lot of what we're doing, unfortunately, when we tell them that they're bad, they're aggressive, they're the ones who hurt us, they're responsible for all the wars, they're benefiting from the patriarchy, that none of their success is their own, and it's all because they've just been set up for success by a system that benefits them at the expense of others, we create really confused men.
And you can't be these same people who are saying, let's socialize boys like girls. They're probably the same people who are like, oh my goodness, is chivalry dead? Why isn't my man opening the door for me? Why isn't he paying for dates? Well, because you socialized him like a girl. I mean, let's be real.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think a lot of these innate male desires are shamed a lot in our culture. another person who reacted to this tweet I had posted said this: a lot of innate male desires are shamed when what we should be shaming is harmful expressions of them and encouraging healthy ones. Things like ambition, competitiveness, horseplay. All of these have a proper time and place. Now, what happens when we tell boys to repress themselves? What happens when we do that? What happens when all of these young men are growing up without fathers and male role models? Well, they become teenagers. And at a certain point, when you become a teenager, you hit puberty. You start looking at women differently. You're experiencing like an onslaught of this is what the world is actually like. And I have to make a way for myself. Eventually, I want to have a family and provide for them and have a career, but I don't have someone in front of me that I can look to. I think it's the same, like for me, it's really hard because there's a lot of divorce in my family. It's hard to know what a successful marriage that's long term looks like. It's the same way for young men who are growing up without fathers. They don't have a male role model who has been through a lot of this stuff that can give them advice and show them the way and show them how to navigate all of these new things in life that are confronting them. And so where do they turn? They go to the internet.
The internet. They go down a pornography pipeline. They go down a manosphere pipeline. They follow their favorite artists and rappers and athletes who may not always talk very respectfully about women because they've kind of been raised in that environment too, where they might not have had a positive role model, and they're surrounded by, what people call toxic masculinity. I think is actually a lack of masculinity, because masculine men are not threatened by women. They don't feel the need to attack or denigrate or degrade women. They certainly don't benefit from pimping out or, using women in pornography like Tate does. But there are so many men and boys who have fallen through the cracks. They've missed out on having a father, a grandfather, an uncle, some type of positive, male teacher in their life. And they look to these influencers who don't have their best interest in mind like a father would. And I kind of relate to the whole divorce thing. I grew up seeing my parents' dysfunctional marriage. They were married my entire childhood and got divorced when I became an adult. So I also did not grow up seeing a happy marriage in my household, but I am so thankful because both sets of my grandparents were married, had great relationships, and I had those positive role models to look up to. But it is still so rare, to have both grandparents alive and still married, that I can see how the majority of people, at least have kids, and especially in the Black community, I think it's like maybe more than 50% of children that are born to a single parent home. It's just so rare for a boy to have a positive male role model in their home where it's most necessary.
Absolutely. And I wonder if by taking positive representations of masculinity out of the picture and by shaming masculinity and men, if we've created an even more toxic version of it.
Oh, yes.
Repression is not good for people. It tends to surface in certain ways. And you mentioned online pornography as one of those ways, and you're absolutely correct. I mean, we have to get real about the internet. I personally don't know how I'm going to handle this subject when I have kids yet, because it's out there, it's everywhere, it's pervasive. You don't even have to go to a porn site to see it. It's just like everywhere.
I'd be scrolling on Twitter and see the craziest stuff. That's just on my timeline. And I'm like, oh my God. Like I do unfollow people who post, retweet, that material, but I feel like it just kind of pops up. I see it in ads and stuff, and it's really unavoidable. So if you're a 12-year-old boy Googling for the first time, you're clearly going to find it, and it's clearly going to affect, your mental state. It rewires your brain.
Absolutely. And when you're not introduced to positive sexuality through your like introduced to that in a normal, healthy way, and instead you're just going to the internet to figure out how to deal with women, and you're encountering what is out there, that has to be messing up this generation of young men.
I'm scared.
It has to.
I'm scared for them.
I mean, so I was doing a little bit of research here and there on the effects that porn has on young men. And because it's so pervasive, you can rest assured that pretty much every young man, that's how they got introduced to
Mhm.
sexuality. Um, and it can decrease your libido, your satisfaction with a partner, and can really rewire the way you see women, which is, it's not even that it's just bad for women, it's really bad for men. You know,
Mhm.
like how do you go throughout the world if your brain is literally wired to see
Right.
women as sex objects? Like that destroys your ability to have normal relationships with women, which
Right. You
is
will
really
never I don't think you'll be
sad.
able to fully able unless you get, this under control, you won't be able to fully connect with a woman. You won't be fully
Mhm.
satisfied by that woman. And
Yeah,
you won't have that, picture perfect marriage and kids that you want. And obviously that's very detrimental for both genders. And
mhm.
we live in a society where now more than ever we need to foster the creation and building of families, and to make them the best they can be. So culturally, I'm
Absolutely.
not talking about like government legislation. People ask me all the time, like, would you like outlaw porn and da 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 da. I'm
Yeah.
really not about censorship, but culturally, as a society, it is in our best interest to speak out on this because family
Mhm.
makes your society better. And
Absolutely.
the gender role switch, the sexual liberation movement that turned into this whole like, you know, this whole generation of porn addicted men essentially, and I'm not
Yeah.
blaming them. I really feel like it's a societal problem, not a problem with individual men, but
Mhm.
we it's really up to us, I think, to figure it out. And when I say us, I don't even mean women. I mean like
Yeah.
everybody.
Yeah, I know there's been a lot of movements created within, I don't know if I like the term manosphere, but like man-centered
Mhm.
parts of the internet to reject that and overcome porn addiction, which I think is amazing. I think that's a really healthy movement that's come out of the manosphere, is trying to get away from watching that and
Mhm.
trying to become healthier in the way you view sex. But also, so that's not the only thing online when you're becoming a teenager that can be really harmful. Um, I This will attract all of them, but obviously we have to talk about
Uh-oh.
incels
Uh-oh.
and internet forums.
Yeah. Yeah, no.
So,
These are the truly extremist people. Like truly
yeah.
we should be scared.
So, yes and no, because everyone that started out is like, when you start out in those forums, I can't assume that you're violent or radicalized
I
yet,
think people
right?
get drawn into the forums
Yeah.
because they're legitimately like, for people who don't know, incel is an actual term. It means
Mm.
involuntarily celibate. So there are plenty of people, male and female, who,
Mhm.
are having no luck with romance and relationships. So
Yeah.
they find these forums where they think they're going to get some help, and then there's the actual pipeline that sucks them in.
Right. And a lot of these forums are a lot of men talking to each other, reaffirming these fears that there's just something broken with them. They'll never find a woman or a partner who loves them. There's the is it the 80-20 rule where like 80% of women are attracted to 20% of men.
Oh,
And
yeah, and they
so
do the
what
whole
happens to
Chad
the
and
other,
Stacy thing.
yeah.
Like everybody's attracted to only
Yeah.
Chads, and you have to, be over 6 feet tall and make over six figures of income. And I'm not saying that is completely unfounded because
Mhm.
there are plenty
Yes.
of women who say stuff like that, but
Yeah.
they really take it to heart and they really create a
Yeah.
whole identity around it. And
Mhm.
at some point, you do have to kind of look inward and not blame everybody else for your
Yeah.
romantic failures because
Mhm.
I know this sounds like kind of a doom and gloom episode, but both of us are, in relationships with men.
Mhm.
There are plenty of women out there who align with more, I guess I would say, conservative values. If you're a man who's looking for that, they exist.
There's a lot of us. Yeah.
They're most likely on Twitter, but they exist. So don't feel
Yeah.
hopeless.
Yeah.
And I don't want to excuse the people who get so extreme that they start to hate women because of it. Because if you go out into the
Mhm.
real world, you will see that there are still kind, nice women out there who don't hate you, who don't want to denigrate your masculinity.
Yeah.
But I do see why people get pushed into this pipeline because They don't have fathers. They don't have male role models. They've been told toxic, 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 patriarchy,
Right.
patriarchy, patriarchy. You guys aren't chivalrous anymore, but you have to pay for my dates. But I'm also going to do this, that, and that. I'm also going to have OnlyFans, and you're a porn addict, and you can't do anything. Like, that's what we tell. That's what women tell men sometimes.
And you have a millimeter of bone missing, so you're not going to make it.
Right. Like, we do put unfair standards on men.
And it's so sad. I remember finding out about incel message boards online and just deep diving into it when I was a teenager, because I go down internet rabbit holes all the time.
I can't stop myself from doing it.
Oh, I love it. But yes, I used to deep dive on this topic a lot. And one thing I found, because I've tried before to say, no, like women aren't just attracted to the six-pack abs and men who are over 6 feet tall. Like me and my boyfriend are the same height, right? But that like falls on deaf ears with this community. And I think one thing I want to say is that while yes, I can sympathize and empathize with feeling completely hopeless, going onto forums where people are all in that same mindset is really going to make it worse. And if there's one thing about women that you need to know, it's that we like confident and self-assured men that aren't just in a pit of despair about being unlovable all the time, because women have a lot of love to offer, but you have to be willing to receive it, right? Yeah. You can't come in bitter and automatically thinking that, she's going to disappoint you. And I would say the same thing to women. Like you can't.
I was about to say that is honestly
something
something I've struggled with coming into the current relationship I'm in. I feel like I did struggle with that at the beginning because of my bad experiences prior, which is wrong. Not all men are like that.
Absolutely. But I think that's not the only type of incel. That's not the only type of online extremism men can fall into. Yeah. That's just one of the most visible ones. But when young men have questions and they don't have people they look up to that they can go to, they're going to the internet, and there's a lot of scary stuff out there. It's not just men that feel unlovable in the relationship context. It's also young men that are impoverished, right? That see rap videos online, talking about selling drugs, who then go and do that because the only men who are making money in their communities are the ones who are selling drugs. And they didn't have a dad who taught them any better and showed them a better way out of their financial situations, right? So this fatherlessness problem is really at the root of all of this. Like, young men need role models. They need positive things to look to as they're coming of age and having questions about how the world really is.
Yeah. And what's a large part of contributing to this fatherless problem, as you just said, a lot of it has to do with crime, the criminal justice system, and mass incarceration. So if you're raised, let's say you're raised in a hood, you're raised in an urban area where a lot of the boys in your street also don't have dads. There's gang violence in the area. The only way that people make out is if you're an athlete, rapper, or you sell drugs. And that's what you do. And so the cycle repeats itself. Your baby mama gives birth, your kids don't have a dad, and then they grow up and do the same thing as you. It is so vicious, and it's not only pervasive just in the Black community. I see it happen all the time in white communities. Like I said a couple episodes ago, I went to high school. I'm not from there, but I went to high school in a very rural white area in southern Maryland, and it was rampant with drug problems, rampant with fatherlessness. Like, we really don't talk about how it affects rural white communities as well. So I just wanted to point that out there. But this like, to go back to the vicious cycle, these kids will grow up, and I mean, it is already bad now. Wait a couple more cycles. The divide between men and women will only grow. The resources for men, I think, will get even less and less. And it goes back to the size of the government. It goes back to mass incarceration. It goes back to the fact that these public schools, these public education, state-funded education, denigrate masculinity. The criminal justice system denigrates masculinity. It's sad, and I think it's on purpose.
Yeah. Well, the state has, I don't know if this is controversial to say. I think the state has a vested interest in pulling apart families and
Oh yeah.
weakening our social ties
Oh
because
yeah.
that makes them
Oh
the
yeah.
people that you go to when you need help rather than having a stable structure, a stable family structure that can support you when things happen. If you don't have that, then the state is what you rely on.
They hate the family structure. This is Marxism. I mean, so many, we talked about Friedrich Engels last week. He wrote a book about how feminism is needed, not because women have any biological differences between men, not because of any of the societal differences between male and female. It's the nuclear family. That's the problem. That's why women are oppressed. That's what we need to get rid of. And this is a clearly, I mean, he was an open Marxist. This is a Marxist school of thought that the government should step in where family fails to meet the government's standards, and it's evil, it's wrong. And I think that they know that that the more families they split up, the more fathers are not in the home, the more likely that these people are going to grow up and vote for more government control, because now they need more help, they need more welfare, they need more social programs. And you see how the state just ever and ever expands. And now we're seeing a crazy phenomenon. I think it started over COVID, but a little bit before that possibly, where parents were shamed and told, you don't know better. The teachers' unions know better. The teachers, the educators hired by the state, your kids belong to them.
Yeah,
essentially.
I think they showed their hand a little
too
much.
A lot of people are starting to wake up to
lie.
it. Yep.
Yeah. No. Olivia, the amount of moms that came out of the woodwork from COVID who are now like radical for freedom is just
it's like the
amazing.
Random soccer moms or like the like libertarian activists now. I actually love it. I do
too. I do too. I'm like, okay, this is finally where we see like women say, no, I'm not doing this. I think the best way the state could disintegrate the family unit is by attacking men and their ambitions and their desire to have a family and create wealth for them and create that stable structure. Like, this is a really great way if you're the government and you want to gain more power. One of the best ways you can do it is by attacking masculinity and making men insecure about their futures. A lot of men I've talked to have expressed feeling like they have a lack of a true north, which is just horrible. I mean, if you look in classic literature, you see these tales of men going on great adventures, and they're doing it for a larger societal purpose or for their family, right? That is something that strikes really deeply for men because a lot of them have this innate desire to be a protector and to provide. And we're breaking apart the fibers of society that give men that meaning. You know, it's really sad.
If we don't emphasize the importance of family in a man's life, and we don't do it from the moment they're born, because already a lot of times their father's not even in the picture, they have a broken family already, and so they don't necessarily grow up knowing what that's like. And I think it takes, to your point, a lot of the masculine traits kind of maybe not go to waste, but are directed into the wrong energies, you know? Like when a man is, males are given aggression, protectiveness, leadership qualities to be in a family, to be a father and a husband typically, to have a great career, to fight in war, like all these great things that men can do, but we're not pushing them to productive outlets these days. We're telling them, oh yeah, you should be really vulnerable and you should still have to meet all these requirements to date women. You still have to be over 6 feet, make over 6 figures, but you should also be super in touch with your emotions and not a sexual being anymore. And you should be soft.
You should be a eunuch.
You should. They want to castrate men. That's just what they. that's just what they want to do.
I don't know about that, but that's funny. Yeah, I think this kind of gets into the MGTOW ideology, men going their own way.
Yep.
You know,
let's talk about marriage. Let's talk about the dating. It's unfair.
They make some points about how the court systems are set up to men's disadvantage, how court systems were set up in a way that made men really screwed financially if they were to get a divorce through alimony. And also, where men wouldn't be able to keep their children as easily.
Right.
I know you've done a lot of research into this.
And so we were talking about last week how, and the source is custody exchange. We were talking about last week how more women are, given custody, like the vast majority of the time when there's a custody battle. A lot of this is due to the previous stereotypes associated with women being homemakers, child rearers, staying in the home. But now that gender roles have changed like a lot over the last 50 years, a lot of women work outside the home. Most women work outside the home, either in a part-time or full-time position. And so, to be fair, about 50% of child custody cases, both parents agree that the woman should be the primary caretaker, which is a lot of times natural and what works best for that family. But in the other half of instances, the male gets full custody of the child only like about 1 out of every 5 times when they actually do fight for that. And I think that's wrong. And we have so many resources for single mothers, not so much for single men. And there was a study that showed that single fathers actually struggle financially more than single mothers. And I don't think a lot of people expect that at all. The source from here is Personal Capital. Single dads also, they during the pandemic, actually, single working dads were much more likely to withdraw money for their retirement or savings accounts than the general population. They were much more likely to adjust their budgets more than the general population, including single mothers. And they were more likely to be worried about their financial future. So the government lockdowns, combined with the government denigrating of masculinity, combined with the government ripping their children away from them and not providing help, or if they do have the full custody of their children, there's a total resource desert. They're desperate. They're literally digging into their retirement plans, but not to say that single mothers don't struggle, because they certainly do. Every single parent struggles to some degree, but there's so many more resources for single women.
And in general, there's a lot more resources for women-related issues. I think this kind of gets to another point where when women are victimized, it's like attention immediately attracts to that because we're seen as more vulnerable, and people immediately want to help. But when it comes to men, they're meant to shoulder so much responsibility for not just themselves, but for everyone else around them. And a lot of times they don't ask for help, but a lot of times, more often than not, they're not offered help.
When they do ask for help, we don't give them a lot of sympathy either. A lot of people say, suck it up, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And in society that works if the government is getting involved. I would rather not government get involved with a lot of social programs. But as a society, as people in communities and neighborhoods, I do think we have a responsibility to step up and ask people, even if they don't even necessarily feel comfortable asking for help, because I also think that a woman is much more likely to ask for help because she will receive help, like you said. A lot of men just don't even want to speak up about it because they feel like they have to bear the weight of the world while at the same time being responsible for all the patriarchy and all the societal problems in the world.
It's a lot of pressure. It's a lot of pressure. I can't imagine what it's like with everyone telling you, okay, you can't be masculine, but also, the backlash being like you have to be hyper masculine and never express any feelings.
I kind of feel like they say it to women a little bit, but the reverse. I see a lot where women are told, you have to be a boss babe, you have to have a career, but you have to have it all. There's a lot of pressure also to have like 5 kids and stuff.
Where's there room for individuality?
There's none. There's none. We're making men and women the same, and biologically, societally, culturally, we're just not, and that's okay.
Right. I read a really interesting study that I thought you might also find interesting. The State of American Friendship did an American Perspective survey in May 2021. So it was very recent. This is a year post the initial lockdowns, right? Some places were locked down for longer than others. Post lockdowns, roughly 15% of men reported having no close friends as of 2021. 15% had 0 close friends. That is compared to 3% in 1995. So in the past 30 years or so, men have gone 3% of men had no friends to now 15%. I think, for one, that points back to the fact that the internet has become a place of people to form any and all relationships. Like if it's too hard in the real world, like we just go online and
But I think it's
and
also
there's
possible
people
to
there.
form a close friendship online. So I'm just going to assume that, hey,
Yeah.
Maggie, I'm just going to assume that statistic will also, I
Mhm.
mean, like, if somebody asked me how many close friendships I had, I would probably include ones that I met online as
Yeah.
well, you know?
That's fair. That's fair. But yeah, 15% of men, and that's higher than women reporting that they have no close friends, which is pretty shocking. In that same poll, only 21% of men reported receiving emotional support from a friend in the past week. That is compared to 41% of women. Like, the disparity is massive.
I need my female friends to give
I
me
know.
support. You were on the phone with me yesterday giving me support. I had, like, my mom was on the phone giving me
Yeah.
support. Like, just anything I really go through. I
Mhm.
love to chat with my female friends, and the community is
Right.
really necessary. And a lot of men are told to be hyper individualist to the point where they neglect building a family and community and friendships, and that's horrible.
Absolutely. I think I've seen this a lot. Anytime I'm like, yes, we want men to be vulnerable, like, tell me how you're feeling. Men have said, oh, but when I've done that in the past, women have laughed at me.
Or thrown
I'm
it
like,
back in their face
who
later.
was laughing at you or throwing it back in your face? That is horrible.
Right. Let me just have a
That's
word with her
horrendous.
for a moment.
If we
But it
want men to be
happens.
vulnerable, we have to create the conditions where they feel that they are actually safe to express how they're feeling about things. One last statistic that was insane from this survey. Only 25% of the men in the survey reported having a conversation with a close friend where they told them they loved them in the past week, compared to 49% of women. And I've heard this a lot, that men do not receive compliments.
Yeah. They'd be holding
Which
on
is,
to a compliment for
yeah,
a long time.
the
I remember when I
longest
first started
time.
dating my boyfriend, I would, compliment him and tell him how handsome he looked in this. And
Yeah.
he would just say stuff like, no one has, like, ever said that to me before. And
Yeah.
I'd be like, oh my God. It's not like I'm his first girlfriend or anything. Like, he's interacted with other women before me. And I was like, I was kind of baffled
Has
because
no
as a
one told you
woman,
nice things about yourself?
right? Because
You
as a
know?
woman, aren't you like to the point where it can almost be creepy, but you're like showered with compliments on the
All
internet.
the
Like
time.
my DMs
Yeah.
are crazy. Your DMs, I guarantee, are crazy. Men don't
Yeah.
receive that level of attention. Now, women are kind of trained to push the attention off and to try to focus on like one man giving you that attention, but men like don't even get that much attention from the women they're dating oftentimes, and that's really
That's
really
crazy.
sad.
One thing I like to do is compliment something super specific with my boyfriend, just because, like, I want him to know that it's a genuine compliment. So for any women listening, if you want to learn how to
Give me some tips.
form a nice compliment something very specific, right? Like, I really love how you handled this particular thing. That was really amazing. Like, I'm really proud of you.
Yeah, they want to. I think they want to hear stuff
well.
about like their leadership skills, their strength, their ability. Like they want to feel like, I know definitely for my boyfriend, he wants to feel like he is a provider, like he can take care of me. So I'm like I'm so thankful for everything he does. I make sure he knows that. And it's so easy to do. It doesn't take any extra work for me. And I think that a lot of men are not asking for a lot. You know,
they're really not. I will say this. So it is, obviously we've been talking about struggles that men are facing right now throughout the episode. It does seem like it's an impossible challenge to be a man right now. But one thing I want to emphasize when we're talking about struggles we're facing throughout life is that those things can all be true, and you can still live a happy and fulfilled life. You can still be a role model in your community, and you can still be the person that's changing those things for your community.
That's where the individualism comes in.
Yeah. I think that's what makes the difference between men who succeed in spite of all of this and who let it, like, brush it off their shoulder, right? And men who end up floundering, because there is a distinct mindset of someone who can overcome these things, and someone who doesn't, right? And our culture has made it so that being a victim is encouraged. And I think that's kind of filtering into men's movements. You
Yeah.
know, this like throwing your hands up in the air and saying, well, things suck for me. And so I'm not going to try to get better. I'm not like, look at my circumstances.
Yeah.
There is
I
one
see
thing
that
that
in
is,
the sorry, I was gonna say I see that in the whole like men going their own way
Mhm.
thing. Like they're just
Yeah,
completely writing off women in marriage.
right. And I know it's scary.
Mm.
And someone on Twitter also replied to this tweet saying like, I cannot begin to tell you how difficult it is and what a nightmare it is trying to date right now. And I can totally understand that and see that. I personally would never want to be a man in the dating pool right now. That
Me
sounds
neither,
terrible.
bro.
I am so lucky to be a woman. I am so blessed to be a woman. Yes, we have our own challenges, but I wouldn't give it up for the world. But I will say this, you will face challenges throughout your life, your own unique set, and then some that happen because you are a man, or you have this specific circumstance. You will face challenges throughout your life, but so will everyone else.
Yeah.
Like that is life really unfair if it's unfair to all of us. You
Right.
know, and there is something to be said for getting up, dusting yourself off, and moving forward and taking those challenges as lessons and an inspiration to move forward.
And still choosing to see the good in people and still choosing to
Yeah.
see the good in society and women because like I said before, there's plenty of good women out there. There's plenty of good men
Mhm.
out there. Not all men are
Yeah.
incels. The majority of
No.
men are not
Lovely
incels. Like
people.
I think the majority
Yeah.
of people are good people, and we have a lot of
Mhm.
societal problems caused by the
Yeah.
government that can and should be undone, and I think it's possible if we work together on it.
Right. And another point of individual action to take is just, of course, taking ownership over your own life, but try to become a leader in your community and exemplify how to treat others through your own
Mhm.
actions. Right?
That's what a good leader does. You know, that's what I think that's a great way to
Mhm.
positively channel your masculinity, you know?
Absolutely. So I actually think this is a great place to wrap. Um, Thank you guys for watching so much. I really enjoyed this episode. I love talking about these issues. I know Olivia does
Me
too.
too, yeah.
We touched on it briefly, but next week, I think we're going to be talking about incarceration in America, which is a really interesting topic to dive in on. You can find me on Twitter at Liberty Anders.
And I am also on Twitter at Rondeau Olivia and Instagram at Rondo.Olivia.
Perfect. And make sure to like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, and leave us a comment telling us any topics you'd love for us to cover in the future, and maybe any other issues men are facing that we didn't cover today. Thank you guys so much and have an amazing week.
Thank you.